Eating Christmas in the Kalahari. In Eating Christmas in the Kalahari, anthropologist Richard Borshay Lee purchases a massive ox for a Christmas feast as a gesture of thanks to the king bushman he has been studying. Instead of showing gratitude, the bushmen relentlessly mock the ox, calling it an old thin bag of bones that will leave them starving. Lee eventually discovered the ox is incredibly fat and that the bushmen's complaint were a cultural joke. They routinely insult successful providers to prevent arrogance and maintain social equality in their community. The article illustrates that actions do not possess universal meaning but are entirely dependent on cultural worldviews. Lee viewed his gift through a Western lens, seeing it as a totally generous, unstinting act meant to show appreciation. Conversely, the Bushmen interpreted his grand gesture through the worldview of an egalitarian foraging society. To them, anyone who provides a massive amount of meat might see themselves as a chief or a big man and begin treating others as inferior. What Lee thought meant thank you was interpreted by the Bushmen as a potential assertion of dominance. One prominent ethnocentric bias in the article is Lee's assumption that his gift should naturally elicit gratitude and praise. Because of his cultural background, he expected to be celebrated for his generosity. This bias blinded him to the power dynamics at play. He had intentionally withheld his own food from the Bushmen all year to protect his research data, maintaining a vast disparity in wealth. When he finally offered a massive gift, he failed to realize that his behavior made him a perfect target for the charge of arrogance. He assumed Western norms of charity and thankfulness were universal, preventing him from immediately understanding the Bushman's tactic of enforcing humility. The story powerfully challenges the notion that praising success and expressing gratitude are universally best practices. In Western cultures, praising a hunter or provider is completely normal. However, in the Bushman society, praising a hunter is viewed as dangerous because someday his pride will make him kill somebody. This practice is fiercely insulting. A successful hunter's contribution seems rude or abnormal to an outsider, but it is actually a highly effective, essential mechanism to cool his heart and make him gentle, ensuring the peace and survival of their community. A unique norm in British culture is the heavy reliance on extreme understatement in daily communication. In British culture, it is very normal and common to describe a disastrous situation as merely a bit of a bother, or to praise an extraordinary hard won achievement by simply saying, not bad. This tradition values modesty, emotional restraint, and a deliberate avoidance of boastfulness or hysteria. Based on their own worldview, an outsider, particularly from a culture that values directness and expressive enthusiasm, might perceive this understatement entirely differently. If they evaluate the interaction through a lens that expects literal, explicit communication, they might conclude that the British person is unenthusiastic, cold, or completely failing to grasp the severity of a crisis or the magnitude of a success. Because Lee viewed their words through his own cultural lens, he was highly anxious and convinced the feast was going to be a disaster. He failed to recognize that, much like the British understatement serves to maintain a polite, modest social equilibrium, the Bushmen's severe downplaying of the ox was actually a vital cultural tool. They intentionally speak of a successful hunter's meat as worthless in order to cool his heart and make him gentle, ensuring he does not develop dangerous arrogance. In both cultures, an outsider taking words at face value completely misses the deeper cultural mechanism at play. A vital best practice for cross-cultural communication is to suspend immediate judgment and actively ask questions to uncover the why behind confusing behaviors. When Lee's ox was insulting, he suffered days of anxiety and frustration because he simply accepted the insults at face value and grew angry. When he finally asked his informant, Tommaso, why no one had explained the customs of insulting the meat earlier, he replied, because you never asked me. Proactively asking questions rather than making assumptions based on one's own cultural framework can prevent significant misunderstandings. A classic cultural misunderstanding involving British culture is the practice of banter, or taking the mickey. In British culture, playfully mocking friends, trading sarcastic insults, or deliberately downplaying someone's achievements is a common way to show affection, build camaraderie, and ensure that nobody gets too big for their boots. However, based on their worldview, an outsider such as an American accustomed to earning earnest praise, direct encouragement, and hyping up friends' successes might witness this exchange as and perceive it as genuine hostility, bullying, or a toxic lack of support. The British cultural norm beautifully mirrors the cultural misunderstanding experienced by Richard Borshay Lee in Eating Christmas in the Kalahari. Just as an outsider might misinterpret British banter as cruel, Lee completely misunderstood the Kung Bushman's tradition of insulting a successful provider. Lee purchased a massive 1,200-pound ox that was loaded with fat as a thank you for the Bushmen. Through his Western worldview, he expected them to express gratitude, and instead, the Bushman told him it was a bag of bones and thin to the point of death. Because Lee took their words literally, he felt immense anxiety, believed the feast would be a disaster, and felt their jokes were tinged with malice. The misunderstanding in both the British scenario and Lee's story stems from a clash of worldviews regarding how to handle success and social cohesion. The most significant lesson from the article is that there are no universally misunderstood acts. Even those we intend to be purely generous, every action we take is filtered through the historical and social context of the people receiving it. True intercultural communication requires us to recognize that our best intentions might be interpreted as manipulative or arrogant, and that we must remain humble and intensely curious about the worldview of others.